Hi, my name is Stewart Lynch, and in this video, I'm going to show you all about the new iOS 15 alerts in SwiftUI. We're going to be looking at how we can replace the now depreciated instance methods with the new ones introduced in iOS 15. We'll be looking at simple alerts, along with alerts with messages, and ones with one or more action buttons. In addition, we'll also focus on a new instance initializer that presents an alert with a message using the given data to provide the alert's content, title, and message. Now before I get started, let me request that if you enjoy this video, please leave a comment below and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Make sure you ring the bell to be notified of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. I'll leave a link in the notes below. If this is something you want to learn, then keep watching. I've created a starter project for this video, and I encourage you to download it from the link in the description below and work along with me as I build out these examples. As you can see, the target for this starter project is iOS 15, so you're going to have to open it in Xcode 13 or higher, as I'm using some new methods and modifiers that are only available in iOS 13 or higher. The first place that your app goes to when it launches is this file here where the app main attribute is located. And you can see what I've done is I have surrounded the content view with a navigation view. And this will ensure that when my content view is presented, it's already embedded inside a navigation stack. In the content view, I've created a VStack with 4 buttons. And each one will be used to represent a different type of alert. All of the buttons are styled using a custom button style that you can find here in the custom folder. There's another custom view struct here that I'll get to a bit later, along with some assets. And these assets include the image that you see on the content view, a custom color used by my custom button style, and a launch screen image. I've also used Jordi Bruin's Bakery app to create this custom app icon. Let's start with some simple alerts. As with the earlier versions of alert instance methods, we can trigger an alert by toggling a Boolean property. So let's start there by creating a private state property called showAlert1, and I'll initialize it as false. Then, for the action of that first button, we'll simply toggle this value to true. To create an alert instance, then, we can attach the alert method to our button, or any other view for that matter, in this struct. But it makes sense to keep it close to the action, so I'm going to do it there. Now, as a start, I'll type period alert, and then I'm presented with the older versions of the alert, including the new ones. Now, if I choose one of the older versions and option click on this, and then open in the developer documentation, I see that even though it's available in iOS 13 through 15, it has been marked as depreciated. So going forward, if my app is only going to support iOS 15, I should be using the new instance method. So let's return to our content view and start again. Now, if you scroll down on the list of initializers, you can see a number of versions that are bound to an isPresented Boolean property with a string or text title, but no alert type with that capital A is being returned. Instead, we see actions, which is a closure that returns some view. So let's choose this one. For the title, I'm just going to type in the string system alert. And then I'll bind it to that state property showAlert1. Now I can tap on the closure to get that trailing closure syntax for the action. And I'm just going to leave the action empty at this point, and I'm testing it now in preview mode. When I do that, I get that title displayed and a single button named Cancel. And then when I tap that Cancel button, the alert is dismissed. Well, what if I don't want the default name cancel? I'd rather have it say OK. So perhaps maybe I can just add a button as the action and use OK as the label of the button. And hopefully it's going to override that cancel button. So let's try that. Well, the problem now is that I'm getting two buttons, the cancel button and the OK button, both of which are doing the same thing, which is dismissing the alert. Now, if I only want to have one button named OK, I have to provide the button with a role, and that role is to be the cancel role. Button role is an enum, so if you start with the period, you'll see your options. And the two that I'm interested in for alerts are the cancel and destructive cases. So let's choose the cancel one and try again. Now I'm getting what I want, a single button that is OK, that when I tap on it, nothing happens except the alert gets dismissed. Now the next button indicates that we want to display another alert with a single button, but this time with a message. So I'm going to require another state property to toggle, so let's just duplicate that first one and rename it as showAlert2. And then in the action, we'll toggle that state in that second button's action. So let's start again by attaching an alert method to this button, and I'm going to locate the one that has a message associated with the title and actions. So for the title, we'll add serious warning, and I'll bind it to the showAlert2 state property. This time when I tap on the action closure, it creates two trailing closures, one for action and one for message. Let's start with the message first. Now the initializer specifies that the message must be a view, and you'd think that perhaps you could use anything here and stylize it, but that's not the case. Stick with a text view for now until things change, perhaps in the future. If I test now without any action, I get the cancel button, but we now know how to fix that. We can just create a button and give it a role of cancel. So then within the action of our button, we can perform any process that we would use to perhaps gracefully exit the app in the case of a fatal or a serious warning. Now this is a pretty serious action, so what we could do instead is change the button's role to destructive. This creates a new button, but that new button is highlighted in red. It also, though, gives us a way for a user to back out by adding back the cancel button that has no action, and we get that for free. You can't have a destructive button without there also being a cancel button. Well, what if we want to have two buttons with or without a message? And we can do that, but we're going to need another state variable. So let's duplicate it one more time, that showAlert variable, and name it showAlert3. And again, we'll toggle that state property within the action of that third button. Now that we're familiar with the syntax for creating alerts, let's do it without having to rely on the code completion. We'll start with .alert, open parentheses, and then immediately enter our title string like, what do you prefer? Now I'm going to follow that with a comma and then the is presented that will bind it to our showAlert3. Well, then we can close the parentheses now and create the button's action closure. Now we want our actions to be two buttons. And the first one is going to have a title of ice cream. And the second one will be candy. And I'll just leave the actions empty. If we test now, we see that we have three buttons. And one of them is the cancel that we get for free. So if I only want 2 buttons, I'll need to pick one of those buttons and give it that role of cancel to override that cancel buttons role. So let me pick the second one now, Candy. If I test now, I see that I do have 2 buttons, but did you notice something? Candy is now in the leading position and not in the trailing position as I would have expected. The cancel role button will always go first. Now if I switch them around and make the cancel button the ice cream button and try this one more time, you see what I mean. One downside I see to this is that the cancel button is always more prominent. It's more visibly bold. Now notice that there is no message on this button, but if I want one, that's simply an additional trailing closure. And I can add that by starting with message, and then using my closure to provide my text for the message, which can be, can't be on a diet. I can test this now and see that I get those 2 options along with the message. However, it's probably not a good idea to allow someone who's on a diet, like me, to choose one of these, so we might want to allow them to back out with a cancel button. So all I have to do is remove the cancel role from that ice cream option, and that'll give me a cancel button for free. And then if I want to change the text, I'll need to add another button though and specify its role as the cancel option. If there are more than 2 buttons, it will always be stacked vertically, with the cancel button being at the bottom. Let's do one more example now then. Only this time we're going to get a bit more complicated. In iOS 13 and 14, there's a version of the instance method where we were able to trigger an alert based solely on a binding to an identifiable object. The content, however, still required the alert struct, which is also now depreciated. The replacement for this is another initializer of the alert instance method. And it's very similar to the other ones in that it is bound to a Boolean value, but it also allows us to use a data object. So let's choose this one and see what we can do. Now I'm going to need a string for the title, some kind of a Boolean value to bind with, along with some generic object that I can use in my actions. So we'll need to create that object. Well, I'm going to go one step further here, and I want to move the logic entirely out of this view into a view model. So first create a new file called viewModel, and within that create a class of the same name that conforms to the observable object protocol. Now the scenario that I'm going to be working on is one that I call to save some file. So I'll need a save function that may or may not fail. Whether it is successful or I get an error, I want to present an alert. If successful, I'm going to create an alert that just tells me it's been successful. So let's create a stub for that function right now, and I'll call it save. Now to simulate a save that sometimes fails and other times is successful, I'm going to, within the body, create a dispatch queue.main.async after and have a delay of 1 second. So this will simulate basically a long network call that results in a response that will either be an error or some success in saving. So to simulate this, I can use bool.random, where in the case of it being true, I have a success case. Otherwise, I have the error case. Now, whether it fails or not, I still want to present the alert. And I want to create a new object that I can use to set the data properties of our new alert type. So we'll need to create an object that is identifiable. So create a new file and call it response data. And inside there, create a struct of the same name that is identifiable. Now this struct is going to have three properties. One will be the title, which is a string. And to conform to the identifiable protocol, I will use that as well for the ID property, since it's going to be unique. Now the second property is going to be an enum that I'll call error type. And it's going to have two cases. In the case that I have a successful save, the case will be none. In the case that I am not successful in saving, the case will be error, and I'll provide that error with an associated string value that will be the error that happens. Now we can add that last property to our object that will be an error of type error type. So if I return now to the view model, I can create a published property called response that is an optional response data. And it has all the stuff that I need to use in my alert. And then in the success case, we can assign this a success response like this, where our title will be success, and the error will be the none case. In the case of a failure, then, we can do a similar thing, except that our title will be saving error, and the error's case will be error, and we can have the associated string unable to save. Well, now that we have the data object, we'll be able to use that in our alert, but what about the Boolean property? So rather than having that in our view like we did for our other ones, let's just have it here. We'll start by creating a published property called showSaveAlert, and I'll initialize it as false. So when someone taps and invokes this save function, we're going to want to make that call, and then right as soon as we get the response back, I want to toggle that SaveAlert property. Now, because we are doing this SaveAlert here, we're not calling it from our view at all. So there is no need to have this property published. I can simply remove it because I am changing it within the content or the construct of this class. Now then, back in Content View, we'll need an instance of our view model. So at the top, we'll create it as a state object, and I'll just call it view model and instantiate that class. For our action in our button, we can call the view model save function, which is inside this button here. For our alert now then, we can, for the title, use the viewModelResponse.title. Now this is optional, and this will never be non-optional, but we just have to be sure, so instead of force and wrapping, let's give it an optional empty string. For isPresented, that's the view model's showSaveAlert that we can bind to. For the presenting object, it will be the view model's response object. Now the action is a trailing closure that provides us with an instance of that response object. Well, the actions are just like the other actions above, except that now we have a response object with some properties that we can use for our button actions. And one of these is the response.error. And that's either going to be none or some error. So let's switch on that. In the case of no error or none, we have a success case, so we can simply present that single button with the label OK and make sure that we set the rule to cancel so that I only do get that one button. In the case of an error, though, we want to have the two buttons. One, the ability to cancel, which we'll get for free, but the second one, we'll be able to offer the person to be able to retry. So we'll create one button with the title retry without a rule, and then for the action, we'll simply call that viewModel's save function one more time. Let's test this now. When I click on the Save button, after 1 second, I get a response, and that's either going to be a success or an error. If it's a success, then great. If it's an error, we can either cancel or retry. And we can keep retrying until we're successful. Now, this is pretty good, except that during the time that we are saving data, there is no indication to the user what's happening. Also, if I'm quick about it, I could also tap on one of those other buttons and interrupt what's going on. And somehow, I want to disable this. And I'll be able to do that by toggling and displaying a progress view whenever we are in that state. So to save us some time here then, I've created a custom view called Custom Progress View. This consists of a Z-stack that has a colored background with an opacity of 0.4 that will sit over top of our view behind and prevent people from tapping on the buttons behind it. But since I've set the opacity down to 0.4, I still can see in behind it. And this is followed by a progress view with a message that we can pass in, like saving file. And it's surrounded by a rounded rectangle with a shadow. So how do we invoke this progress view? Well, back in our view model then, I can create a new publish property that is called loading that is set as false. And it has to be published because I'm actually going to be using that to determine whether or not to show the view in our view. So then when we can all save, we can toggle it right away while it goes off and fetches for 1 second the response. And then as soon as I get the response, I'll toggle it back again to make it false. And that will dismiss this view. In Content View then, we can embed our V-stack in a Z-stack. And then, as the last item in the Z-stack, we'll conditionally apply the custom progress view based on whether or not the view model is loading. And because it's published, as it changes, the view will refresh. So if view model is loading, we can present a custom progress view with the message saving file. Let me test this on the simulator now. We get that nice loading view over top that dimmed background that allows us to see through it but not tap on any of the buttons. It looks good in dark mode too. Well, that's it. I've hoped you enjoyed this video and have learned something useful. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.